Faultlines.
Welcome back to Faultlines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us is economic, social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, Steve Grumbine. Now, Real Progressive Action is a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively dedicated on education and advocacy for modern monetary theory. And not to mention a friend of the show. Steve, welcome back, man. How's it going?
Hey, man, I'm doing good, buddy. Thank you both for having me on.
Oh, always. Have you been keeping safe? I mean, we've all been hunkered down, and it seems like the hunkering down has gotten that much more pronounced at this point. So how's it been going? Have you been healthy, safe, family, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I have a job that allows me to work from home, and so I'm one of the very, very lucky ones right now. But the interesting thing is that I have a child with autism that I have to do special needs virtual school, which is a real challenge. And you have a 8-year-old that does cyber school. You put that together, that's a lot of work to do during the middle of a work day on top of everything. So it's been a challenge, but I'm one of those guys that doesn't terribly mind the remote work. I kind of like this environment personally, so it's not been too horrible in that sense.
To drag me here kicking and screaming. Well, they had initially, when we first started working from home, I think I called my boss and was like, hey, do you mind if I come into the office? Like, it was so weird to me because I had gotten so accustomed to it. Then after maybe a month, I was like, all right, I can deal with this. It's like it wears on you, wears you down eventually. Let me ask you this. So Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, I just read it, declined to extend key emergency lending program that the Federal Reserve had been using to help keep credit flowing to businesses, state and local governments, and other parts of the financial system. He also moved to claw back much of the money that supports them, hindering Mr. Biden's ability to use the central bank's vast powers to cushion the economic fallout of the virus. Basically, Steve Mnuchin clawed back money that was being used to basically keep the government afloat and keep the country, the businesses and so forth afloat. Now, this is in spite of Wall Street screaming, despite Jerome Powell screaming. These people at this point know that there's going to be a recession, and it seems that Trump is trying to hasten that or accelerate it and push it kind of over the cliff for an incoming Biden administration, hampering the administration with a recession in the early term. What do you think? Am I right on this, or am I missing something else in regards to the actions that Steve Mnuchin or Trump is taking at this point to basically celebrate?
Interestingly, you're not. How do I put this? Bob Hockett, who is a Federal Reserve guru and guess an advisor to many, is actually one of the very few people who I know on the Biden transition team that I respect and believe and trust. Wrote an article just, I guess it was 2 days ago, in Forbes magazine, basically saying Treasury's gift to the Fed and to our states, cities, and small businesses. And I'll just read the very, very first paragraph of this. He says, I'll make this short and I hope very sweet. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin yesterday conferred a gift on the Fed and hence on our cities, states, and small businesses. He didn't appear to have intended it as a gift, but it's a gift nonetheless. And so really at the end of the day, they were using this CARES Act as kind of like a threshold that they could use. And so it ended up not serving the people nearly as well. But in fairness, the Fed already had these powers. They already had the ability to do the municipal liquidity facility and the Main Street lending program, the MLSP or MSLP. They already had these abilities to do these things. And so under these exigent circumstances provision in the Federal Reserve Act, there's plenty of this. So I think what we're looking at here, and I'm going to be talking to him either today or tomorrow. I think it's just more idiocy. I think it's an ignorant thing. Now the question will be, will the Biden administration leverage this once it takes power? And my suspicion is that with guys like Bob Hockett on the team, that there is a chance. Do I think Biden will do it? I have no idea. I'm waiting to see who his Treasury Secretary is going to be. I think we're going to find that out very soon. The most recent headlines say that whoever he picks will be acceptable by both progressive and moderates. I'd like to see who that is, because I'm trying to envision anybody who would be acceptable to moderates that would be acceptable to progressives. But that's to be determined. But I don't think it's completely. I think it's kind of like one of those scare tactics that made it to the New York Times. It made it out to all the major publications, and, people that didn't dig a little deeper, went ahead and literally put their hair on fire. Oh my God, they're setting the house on fire as they walk out the door. And that may be what they think they're doing, but it doesn't appear to be something that's really all that much of a big deal.
You threw out a name there, Steve. Bob Hockett. Who is that? Just real quick for folks who don't know, including myself.
Robert Hockett is he's a senior fellow over there at Cornell Law, teaches law over there. He also works at the New Consensus, which is a think tank, and he is one of our best minds in the modern monetary theory school of thought, in terms of being able to talk to people who you and I probably might find offensive, quite frankly. He has the ability to speak fluent centrist and fluent progressive. And, my hope and prayer is that as a rogue strain of truth, he can serve as some sort of, a creation of goodwill. Let's hope something good comes from his involvement. That's all I can say.
I hear you. Kind of an intermediary, between, like you're saying, between these different political perspectives and economic perspectives. I mean, another way into this, Steve, if you're looking at the Biden administration, what would you consider in terms of economic policy a success? Like in terms of what they're putting out, bills you're expecting, executive orders, those kinds of things, like in both broad strokes, but also maybe in terms of specific details, what would you see as successes, Steve?
Well, right now at this point in time, huge push to eradicate student debt. I think the last check that I saw, it has probably grown since, was over 800,000 signatures to eliminate student debt altogether, to just cancel it outright. And Biden has the ability to do that via executive order, ironically. And so the idea here is that, there's a lot. I think there's some 277 executive orders that they have laid out flat out that he can do that'll bypass a contrarian Senate. Now, is that good for democracy? Is that bad for democracy? Given the way that society is right now, I don't know that there is a democracy, so saying it's good or bad for democracy is kind of a canard, in my opinion. But the opportunity to do some really good things is there. So why do I say it? Do I think Joe Biden inherently does good things? Abso-freaking-lutely not. The man's a menace. But it's going to be awful hard to say no to important things when the power is there to do them. And so I think that the opportunity to, I don't know if you've engaged many Biden supporters or centrists, but they've already got their built-in excuse hatch. Well, Biden can't do anything. The Republican Senate will block everything. Yeah, but not so. There's real opportunity there for him to bypass that roadblock. And it'll be interesting to see what he does with that power, if he uses that power. And like I said, I know people that are trying to push him from the good guy side. Now the question is how many bad guy voices are going to be in his ear and pushing, and I suspect they'll be the larger voice in the room. So what do I consider a success with the Biden administration in terms of policy? I don't see Biden as a success, but that doesn't mean we can't win. And so I would like to see student debt removed. I'd like to see that completely wiped out. The amount of fiscal space that would create for average, everyday people, freeing up, people like myself who have $1,000 a month in student loans alone. And then you look across the board at all the older people, these folks that went back to school after the last crash that haven't got a pot to piss in and that have been looking for a new career that doesn't exist. Those people could easily, I think that we should just eradicate all student debt. That's a big one right there. I think, something along the lines of seeing a robust Green New Deal, because I believe that the Congress can advance some of these things. Now, there isn't a huge number of progressives in Congress, let's be fair. But the bills that could come before a Biden administration would be quite interesting. So whether or not they make it through Congress and up to his desk and he signs it, I just like to see a change in the narrative. And unfortunately, I don't think much of good is going to come out of a Biden administration. But for the little bit of hope you got, there's 277 executive orders there that might provide some relief.
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. I really do hope. I don't have huge expectations, but getting rid of student debt would be big. I mean, if indeed the point or the goal of Trump is to kind of push the country into a recession to kind of hamstring Biden's activities, the executive orders may be an end run, especially if the two races in Georgia are won by the Republicans. Meaning it's one thing if Democrats take the Senate. It's another thing if they don't. But I suspect, and tell me what you think about this, that Biden on some level maybe even want the Republicans to take the Senate. Like the items and the stuff that he wants to pass, he wants, I think, an excuse and would use the Republicans as an excuse to not do various things. But like you say, the executive orders in and of itself goes around that. Meaning you can't make that argument the moment that you can do executive orders, and Donald Trump was using them to the hilt. But what does this mean from the standpoint of tit for tat? Like if you think about our politics recently over the past, let's say 8 years, you had the Democrats using Russiagate to delegitimize Donald Trump's presidency. You have Donald Trump taking revenge, basically delegitimizing Joe Biden's win, saying that they cheated and there was election fraud and everything else. What happens when the president starts using executive orders and the next president comes in office? Do you know what I mean? It seems like it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
You're setting the precedent. I mean, but this is the thing, right? What we complain about with Democrats, and let's be fair. All people that want a third party, for the most part, have been a Democrat at some point in time, right? Well, I shouldn't say all, but many, right? Obviously, libertarians from the right and so forth, but most people that are looking for a third party have traveled through the Democratic Party and found it wanting. They didn't get what they wanted. And in the going storyline within progressive communities is that Democrats typically lay down before they ever fight. They never fight. They never fight. Republicans pull out all the stops, but Democrats never seem to pull out the stops for the things that we think need to be done as progressives. Now, with that in mind, the idea of watching Joe Biden finally fight back, if in fact he were actually taking a progressive cause to the finish line, would be a truly radical change. I mean, let's be fair. The chances of that could be measured in negative numbers, right? But let's just say hypothetically, for the heck of it, that Biden suddenly grows a spine, suddenly finds a heart, and says, "Hey, I want my legacy to be one of helping people, not fattening Wall Street." And let's just say he just randomly has this moment. In that case, I would suggest that it would be about damn time that Democrats fought for something other than Russiagate or these other nonsensical things that kind of hide their flaccid, ineffectual entire belief system.
And by the way, Steve, if they want to win, they're going to have to do it. I mean,
they have to do it.
Yeah, I think part of the reason for the recession stuff is the hamstring Biden. So in 4 years, it makes it difficult for him to get elected. But look, if he wants to do it, he needs to hit it out the park. And $50,000, basically putting that in all of these people's pocket, is a way to do it. Removing that debt. I agree with you on this. This is Steve Grumbine, political, economic, social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively dedicated to education and advocacy of modern monetary theory. Steve Grumbine. We will be back in a moment. This is Faultlines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Faultlines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Faultlines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and myself, Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Steve Grumbine, political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. By the way, check that website out, realprogressives.org. Again, realprogressives.org. You can also follow Steve on Twitter, Steve himself, that is, at SD Grumbine. And you can follow Real Progressives on Twitter at Real Progress US. Again, Steve, thanks for being with us. I'm going to do a hard pivot. We were talking about the Biden administration, what seems to be coming up here, where you think sort of what you see as a potential win condition in terms of what Biden would be able to do, and the idea that Biden should push back. Anyway, just to briefly recap that last segment, again, I'm doing a hard pivot here. I want to talk about MMT and economics in general. Wide concerns over recent years, if not decades, really decades, that there would be a coming debt crisis. We saw a kind of financial crisis back in 2008, but a lot of people were concerned that was sort of one sign on the road to what would be a larger economic catastrophe. In fact, we've had a number of folks on this show saying exactly the same thing. Now, usually these concerns have to do with the massive deficit that the United States government is running. As far as I can tell, MMT, which is not, it is both a sort of new theory, but also an attempted, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but also an attempted consolidation of how the government currently runs. The idea being under modern monetary theory that the government has the ability to print money. When it taxes money, it does not sort of recirculate that. It effectively uses that to, it destroys the money that it taxes basically. And through this, the government controls both the input and the sort of output of money in the financial system. Just very briefly, is that roughly accurate, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right? You know, if you were dealing with a steam, a steam engine or something like that, as you're trying to, you build up too much pressure, you have a release valve that lets steam out of the engine, and you have not enough steam in there, and they put more coal on the, and build up the steam pressure, right? In an economy, especially a fiat economy, the tax is a carrot and a stick. The tax is the thing that drives the currency. It kind of gets the engine started because you need to do something to get that currency. And it also is the release valve when the economy is overheating. There's no printing money. The taxes are always deleting that money. So when you hear people just say, yeah, just going to print money to oblivion. Nah, we taxed money out of existence and we're backfilling that money with new money. So it was once in a place that we were trying to get rid of. Let's say we're trying to tax the rich because they're too damn rich. And that money is deleted from the economy, but then we spend new money, but we spend that new money in a different way that distributes it to, let's say, the poor or to some very needed thing like a Green New Deal or, green energy, et cetera. That's a choice. That's a policy decision to tax what we think is bad for society or that we want to, change out of society, rent-seeking behavior, you name it. And then on the flip side, spending it back in, yes.
So broadly, that makes sense, and that sort of fits. Again, I'm a definitely a layperson on this one, not an expert, but that fits my understanding of that. Thank you for that overview, Steve. A couple of quick sort of comebacks on this. One, does MMT have any internal set of opinions on whether a fiat currency is preferable to a either like a metallic currency, either a gold-backed currency or some other kind of non-fiat currency? And that's thing one. And then thing two is, I'm just going to lay my biases out on the table. What about for somebody like me who just thinks the system as a whole, thinks the economic system has deep problems, and specifically looking at looking at you, military-industrial complex, thinks we're spending way too much government money on the military, and instead we should be prioritizing and should have been prioritizing for many decades at this point, like our productive capacities, whether you're doing that through state direction or whether that's just a sort of inevitable outgrowth of the state policies that guide the choices that individual companies are able to make. Like that, instead of building weapons, we should have been building factories and trying to employ people in those factories. And specifically, another thing that you can sort of tack onto this, not to take too long here, is that maybe the shift to like the services economy, to services, the shift to sort of the intellectual economy and patents, and more recently to like IT and IP on internet technologies. Those are potentially valuable things, but we might have over prioritized them by using the rest of the world, or at least parts of it, as our factory. Instead, we should like pull back a little bit and try to reprioritize things. That might be slightly outdated, but I'm just curious, what's MMT's take on that set of ideas, Steve?
So let's go with number one. The first thing is a gold-back preference or a fiat preference, an MMT thing. Well, anytime you add a constraint of any variety, you've eliminated your ability to do things, period. And so gold, or commodity of any flavor, limits our ability to handle any kind of shocks to the economy whatsoever. And so a fiat currency is clearly the preferred because it gives you the maximum space to adjust to whatever circumstances come your way, especially in a society where we're about to hit really, really devastating climate change type events, whether it be from mass migrations from climate refugees or whether it be simply from, natural disasters destroying coastlines. You do not want to be stuck on a gold standard. In fact, we had to leave the gold standard to fight World War II. We have a real battle on our hands with this climate problem here. That requires a World War II level mobilization. So having a gold-backed currency in any way, shape, or form would spell the death of us all, in my opinion. Now, you brought up that these two are not inconsequentially related to one another. These two are very, very tied together. In fact, they are very, very important because the idea of the military-industrial complex being spent on is proof positive of two very important things. Number one, we need a vent to spend money because regular people don't accept the fact that the government can spend on health care, can spend on free education, can spend on these great things for the people. So by spending it into the military, that's their first point of penetration into the economy. They spend that money, military Keynesianism, whatever you want to call it, they spend that money right into the military, and then it matriculates through the economy from there. Soldiers, the commissaries, all the different devices, not just bombs and stuff like that, but we're talking about health care and the military, you name it. All that spending starts there, and then it makes it back out into the economy. That's not good or bad. That's just the way it is. Now, you made the point. Why don't we do this on infrastructure? Why don't we do this on making our roadways better? I'm taking some liberties with what you said. Why don't we rebuild our infrastructure instead of the military? Why don't we do that? And these are all policy questions that stem from a lot of red scare-minded stuff. People still have this death fear of Stalin taking over the United States, gulags and Gestapos and all kinds of other crazy stuff that have been pumped into our brains. And so the idea of spending on these public purpose things, we haven't quite reclaimed the public purpose yet. We're still stuck in this idea that that's socialism. And so being able to dismantle poor understandings of what socialism is and what socialism isn't, I think is a key thing there. But we are up against – think about what painful stuff Joe Biden, the jerk of all jerks, Joe Biden had to defend being a socialist. I'm not a socialist. I beat the socialist. I mean, what kind of commentary is that, man? That just made me hate him, right? That just made me hate the guy. But that's what the country is. They're terrified of anything that appears to be socialist. So what you're saying is, hey, why don't we spend on the public purpose? Why aren't we reinvigorating? Why aren't we retrofitting smokestacks in every factory in America? Why aren't we doing these different things? And it really is a policy decision founded in a lot of fear of the American public that this is somehow or another socialism. It isn't socialism, not at all. Socialism is a relationship between capital and labor that we are completely out of balance. We have zero socialism in this country in that respect. We are a true capitalist and cap type country where capital has all the power and labor has almost none. The unions in this country, the teachers union, the nurses union, public sector unions have power. I think there might be 4% of the entire country that is union outside of that. So unions have almost no voice right now, and we need to change that. So when it comes to what socialism is and why we're not spending on these priorities, it's because we've allowed our media, we've allowed our schools, we've allowed our water cooler chat to devolve into a false notion of what socialism is and is not. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to change the culture to even make some of these great ideas palatable, which is where MMT comes in, because it takes away the fear of spending. You're not taking some of these tax dollars to do this. It's public money, and public money is able to do wonderful things. That takes us back to your question about fiat or gold. We can do these wonderful things. We can prepare for climate change. We can satisfy incoming immigrants without it fearing them taking our jobs. We can do these things with a job guarantee, et cetera. And that's where the fiat currency kicks in. And that's why MMT is so powerful. It is the blueprint for how to solve all these problems.
So, but the limits of MMT are basically the resources of a particular society, right? I mean, like if you have, I think once before you gave the example of schools. If Joe Biden says, okay, we're going to eliminate all student debt, and on top of that, public and state universities free, anybody can go to school. And you ended up with, let's say, a rush of people flooding into colleges. Well, those colleges may need more desks, they need more books, they need more, all of these different supplies that they wouldn't necessarily have access to, which creates inflation in regards to the prices for those items up until the point where society can compensate and meet the demand. Like I think you made the argument once before that the limits of MMT in regards to inflation is based on the real resources of a particular nation and whether or not the money aligns with the resources. If you're spending a lot of money and you don't have resources, then the price of the item goes up. Can you explain that? I mean, this was something that you were given, because some people ask you, well, what's the limits? Can you have $200 trillion as a deficit and be okay with it under MMT? Like those type of arguments. Could you make that case?
Absolutely. So I am a process engineer. I live for processes, and I'm a project manager, so I always think about what steps have to be taken to deliver a given service, right? So if you're taking any one of these services, like Medicare for all, or you're talking about school like what you just said, you have to evaluate the real resources available to serve that. Is the right tool or technique a virtual school where one teacher can teach many classes and have many students and then hire teacher's aides to help grade papers? Possibly. Is everything going to be a face-to-face school where you require firm, hard desks and school setting, et cetera? If that's a real hard constraint, if that's the answer. But if the answer is we can do this virtually, well, guess what? We have all kinds of new options. So the question becomes, what is the tool? What is the technique? What is the input and the output?
Steve, I'm sorry, man. I have to interrupt you. We're hitting the hour. But the guys, the voices that you've been listening to, friend of the show, Steve Grumbine, political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively dedicated to education and advocacy of modern monetary theory. You can find Steve on Twitter at @SDGrumbine and at Real Progress US. You guys are listening to Faultlines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back